We are absolutely delighted to have Mick Garris, award-winning filmmaker, here with us this evening. Mick is a huge talent and is world-renowned, especially for his work in the genre of horror. He has written and co-written a number of feature films, and he has also produced a number of shows, including Pretty Little Liars and Fly 2. Throughout his illustrious career, Mick has worked alongside other greats such as John Landis, Steven Spielberg, Stephen King, and of course, Michael Jackson. Mick has kindly agreed to be here with us this evening to tell us a little bit about his work with Michael. So would you all join me in welcoming him here?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Annika. Can you hear me okay? Oh, okay. That was a resounding answer.
Thanks, Mick, again for being here with us this evening.
A pleasure.
So you and your wife were actually zombies on the Thriller video. How did that come to be, and what was it like working with Michael on Thriller?
It was wonderful. I had been close friends with John Landis, the director, for a long time, as well as Rick Baker and the other makeup effects artists. So when they were shooting the video, John invited us both to be zombies. And there were three categories of zombies. There were the dancer zombies, the background zombies, which were less made up, and the close-up zombies. So we were fortunate enough to be the close-up zombies. And we're the only ones who kept our costumes. All of the others were destroyed.
Wow, so you still have your costume?
Yes, it's on display at a museum in Seattle, Washington called Mopop. And it's, like I said, they burned all of them except the two costumes that my wife and I wore.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. What was it like working with Michael? What was he like on set?
Michael was amazing. When the cameras weren't rolling, he was very gentle and quiet and, "Hi, Mick, how are you? And you look really nice under that makeup." But then once the cameras started rolling and John Landis called action, bang, he was an explosion. He was a lightning bolt. He was a force of nature. And it was explosive. It was amazing to see him go from this gentle, soft-spoken guy to someone who was very powerful. Now, I only worked for a day on it out of the 5 days of shooting. Cynthia worked for 3 days on it. And it wasn't until years later that I really got to work with him closely and know him very well.
We won't put you on the spot and ask you to do the Thriller routine, so don't worry.
Okay.
Did you stay in touch with Michael after Thriller?
Not until because I was only a performer, a zombie actor for one day. So it wasn't like we established any great relationship. But when I was shooting the miniseries of Stephen King's The Stand, Michael asked Stephen King to write for him the scariest music video ever. And it was originally called Is This Scary? And King recommended me as the director. When I was doing post-production for The Stand, I met with Michael and we hit it off. And that's when all of the pre-production began for Is This Scary?, which eventually became Ghosts, through a complicated series of events, which we'll get into here, I'm sure.
So, as I understand it, you helped to write what became Ghosts. Was Michael involved in that writing process?
Yeah, the original idea was Michael's, and then Stephen King ran with it, and then he basically finished it, and Michael wanted some more changes. And once I was brought on board to direct, then I did all of the rewriting with him. Some of the ideas were Michael's, some of them were ideas that I brought to it myself. But it was very, very much a Michael Jackson movie, one that he wanted to be the best, scariest music movie ever.
We've all obviously seen Ghosts, and it's an incredible piece of work. There's a huge number of special effects and things like that in it. Did you have to rein Michael in at all? We know him to be hugely creative and have these wonderful, great ideas. Was there ever a moment you had to say, "Hold on, Michael, hold on"?
No, Michael would not be reined in even if we wanted to rein him in. And who would want to? Now, working on Michael time was a very different experience. You know, I directed the first 2 weeks of shooting. And Michael time isn't like a clock on your wall. It's like a clock that Salvador Dali painted. It was time was liquid in Michael's world. So there would be days where we were just waiting for him to show up, and there would be bodyguards outside of his trailer who would not let the assistant directors bother Michael. And I would say, look, we've been waiting, we're ready for Michael. And I would just go to the door and knock on it past the bodyguards, and Mike was, oh, are we ready? Nobody told me. So and then we would go out and do the work. But we worked for a long time. I shot a lot of the special effects and the angry crowd outside of the mansion, where Michael tears his face off, rips his face down, smashes himself into dust. Those were things that we did. But we never got into the music, the songs for it, because the first scandal happened and everything shut down for 3 years.
Yeah. What was it like working, or what changes did you notice in Michael, having worked with him back in the days of Thriller, where he was, a young man, and then all the way up to Ghost, where he's, a little bit older, probably more seasoned, and has just gone through, quite a horrific time in his life and come out the other end of that?
Well, it was a very different experience for him, but most of that happened after we shot our 2 weeks of Ghosts. That's when everything came down. When we were working on Ghosts, he was still the same lovely, fun-loving, practical joking performer as before. He called his place Neverland because it's a place for children who never grow up, and that included Michael Jackson. This was a guy who didn't go to school. From the time he was 5 years old, he was a huge star, and so he never got to experience that childhood. So that childhood became a part of his adult life as well. A lot of us aren't lucky enough to be in touch with our 12-year-old selves, unless we are lucky enough to have lives in the arts where we play pretend for a living. And that was something that Michael did. And until he was forced to have to face some things that, who knows what the circumstances were, only the people who were involved know about those things, but they were things that he had to face, and they had a terrible effect on the life that was to come for him.
Indeed. And you mentioned he was something of a practical joker. Did he ever do or play any practical jokes on you?
Oh, there would be times I would get a phone call at midnight. Mick Garris, please. And I said, this is Mick. Gotcha. And he was very playful and with phone calls and the like. And it was something I didn't expect, because the public persona of Michael was as a very polite, very quiet, soft-spoken guy. But the more you get to know him, the more you got to know him, the more you realize what a very smart guy he was, and what a sense of humor he had, and he wasn't afraid of it. And he loved scary things, but they scared him too. So he wanted to be the one who's scared rather than the one who was scared himself.
Did you get a chance to visit Neverland yourself?
I did, a few times. I was very lucky in that regard. We first met there to talk about Ghosts, or Is This Scary? By the way, the version that we did before it went back into production 3 years later with Stan Winston directing is on YouTube. If you look up Michael Jackson, Is This Scary? That's all the footage that we shot and cut together before everything changed. So it's a very, very different sort of thing, but you might want to look that up. Yeah, I stayed at Neverland overnight one night. My wife and I visited there several times, and the first times were absolutely fantastic. His zoo, you haven't lived until you've held hands with a chimpanzee and swung him around you. and the rides like Disneyland, all of that. But it soured, you know, later after a couple of years of all of the scandal that had happened. I went up there and it was not nearly as loose and fun. There was a lot more security. There weren't as many people there. The grounds were fading and not kept up. And, you know, it was very much like Xanadu in Citizen Kane, you know.
You've mentioned previously that you were able to get to know Michael quite well and become friends with him. What was he like outside of work?
He loved movies, you know, more than anything, he wanted to be a director. And so even though he had worked with the likes of Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese, he asked me to give him directing lessons. And, you know, he just was passionate about movies. I guess I was more available and a lot less expensive. But he loved Disneyland. One of the times he brought me out to meet with him to talk about making movies and the like, he was staying in the penthouse at one of the hotels at Disney World. And so I thought we were going to do a lot of work and go through preparation and go through note taking and all this. But no, he just wanted a friend around. There weren't many people that were around him that he could trust as friends who didn't want something from him. You know, there was nothing in my career that I wanted from Michael. There was no money or finance that I ever wanted from Michael. And so I think he knew that and developed a trust in me, and he knew that we shared a passion for movies and for life and for music. And so when he brought me to Orlando, basically we went to Disney World and went in the back entrances to all of the rides so that he could go with a mask that he wears similar to what we're all wearing these days, thinking, yeah, Michael, nobody's going to recognize you here at Disney World. Yeah. Good luck with that. But he was very fun loving and very sweet and very generous. And, you know, it was, there was the soft spoken Michael, and then there was the prankster-ish Michael, where, you know, he would do phone jokes and things like that. But he was full of life. And, you know, I did see that change over a couple of years.
And one final question. What's your fondest memory of Michael, and how would you like him to be remembered?
You know, he was so generous and so much fun. My fondest memory of him is actually before our friendship began, but it was that day on the Thriller set. And watching him, there's the long dolly shot with him and Ola Ray where he's trying to freak her out and scare her. And it lasts about 2 minutes long with no cuts. And just seeing Michael getting ready first and being very polite and very reserved and waiting for John Landis to set up the shot. And once it's ready to go, you know, is everything okay? Is the makeup all right? Is everything fine? And then when John calls action, to see this explosion take place, and for 2 minutes of running the camera scene, the 3-minute long scene, it just was like two different people, this split personality, both of them amazing human beings, but from opposite sides of the lens. And that's one of the things I will probably remember most about him, other than going to Disneyland and laughing and playing and going in the secret entrances and all of that. But, you know, I remember him as a great artist, and my experience with him was a really sweet, generous, loving human being.
Thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
A pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mick. And what are you working on at the moment?
At the moment, the great British author Clive Barker and I are working on putting together a new series of all original stories that he has written. And I have a podcast called Postmortem with Mick Garris, where I interview people within the horror genre, everybody you can imagine, from Stephen King to Clive Barker to John Carpenter to Whoopi Goldberg, all kinds of people. So it's something we're in our 5th year of that, and that keeps me busy as well.
Fantastic. So everyone can check that out. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor.
A pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for everyone joining together and celebrate the memory of this not very often screened film. Have a good night. Thank you. Cheers.